Hello there, and in this video we will be covering 20 additional tips on GeoGuessr that new players can learn. If you find this video helpful, feel free to drop a like, and also if you want to keep in track with future tip videos on the channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button. We're aiming to get to 1000 subs by the end of the year. Let's make it happen, and yeah, let's move on to the video. Utility poles are very useful to learn when trying to get better at GeoGuessr quick. I will cover the most distinctive examples in the next few slides, and we are going to start off with these three different black and yellow striped poles. These are found in South Korea, Japan and Taiwan, and when the stripes are vertical and straight, you should be in Japan, which is shown in the middle. South Korea and Taiwan's poles are mostly spiral struck horizontal, and the main difference between the two is that Taiwan's reaches all the way to the floor, whereas South Korea's stops before it reaches the bottom. There are many examples of poles having holes in them, although there are several examples. Hungary, Poland and Romania are the main countries in Europe to have them the most often. Although Romania and Hungary's can be hard to separate as a beginner, they are very different to Poland's. Hungary and Romania's hole poles are generally much larger than Poland's, and it is more common to find white paint or white stickers on. As well as that, the holes reach the ground, whereas Poland's stop well before it reaches the ground. Here is an example of a thick Romanian pole with the yellow sticker, and here is an example of a Hungary pole that shows the holes reaching all the way to the bottom. Here we have a Poland pole, and as you can tell, the holes do not reach the bottom, and also they don't really go high up either. And of course, the holes are a lot more narrow. You can get distinctive stickers on utility poles, which can confirm which countries and regions you could be in. When you get wooden poles with yellow stickers like this on the left, it is very common to get these in the UK or Ireland. In the middle, you have a black sticker with white text, and this is only found in Malaysia and more specifically on the mainland. The third sticker may be hard to spot, but you do have a blue sticker on this wooden pole. Here is an example of a blue sticker on this wooden pole, and this is very unique to France. You can also use shapes and patterns of poles to identify which countries you could be in. For example, on the left we have the, I quote, ladder pole, and it is called the ladder pole because you have these short horizontal segments on the pole which you can picture climbing like it is a ladder. Ladder poles are mostly found in Brazil, but you can also get similar ones in Portugal and Nigeria. And here is a close-up example of a ladder pole in Brazil. You can also get octagonal shaped poles in the Americas, and here is an example of one in Mexico. Although octagonal poles can be found elsewhere, if you are in the Americas, however, and when you see one, there's a very high chance you are in Mexico. Here is a close example of one found in Mexico, and be aware that you sometimes get octagonal poles in Colombia, but they will never be as thick and as bulky as these ones. You can also get poles that appear like waffles, or in other words, waffle poles, and these can be mostly found in Spain and France in Europe, and this can be an effective way of ruling out Portugal if you are split between Portugal and Spain, for example. The top of utility poles can be very useful for separating similar countries, especially the Baltics. Although there are occasional overlaps, the trident-shaped pole for Estonia in the bottom right is very unique to Estonia, whereas for Latvia it has got those markers on opposite sides, and for Lithuania you mostly have a lot more of those rounded things on the top of the electric poles. When looking more into utility poles, it can be difficult to get your head around if you're new to the game. If you want to learn more useful tips with utility poles, I recommend checking out Zigzag's video, which covers the subject very well. Links are found down below, and a big shout out to him for making it. My next tip is getting used to road systems in different countries. This can be helpful and useful for identifying countries, but also be able to work out which regions it can or cannot be. And a good example of this is learning the South African road system, or more specifically, it's our roads. For example, you could be unsure between Cape and Pretoria, and you have R300s. And a good way to separate the two is actually zooming in to the map. And as you can tell, we've got R300s here, which is in the Cape provinces. You sometimes get 300s just on the outside, but you'll never get them this far north, especially towards Pretoria. In the previous video, we touched on bollards that you can commonly find on the side of main roads. You can also get waypoints, which look mostly like these examples, and some are very unique in given countries. For example, when you get a waypoint with a red marker on the top with like an Asian-like text, you should be in Cambodia, like the one on the left. Generally, when you have a yellow topping, you should be in France, especially if you see that unique D road. You can also get more varied shapes, such as the example on the right, which can be found in Sri Lanka. You can also get these poles and markers at higher altitudes or in areas where they experience a lot of snowfall. If you get this candy looking arrow at the top, you should be on the northern island of Japan, which is known as Hokkaido, but you do occasionally get them sometimes almost as south as Sendai. You can also get these, I quote, ski or snow pole stick things in mountainous altitudes in several European countries. The middle image was taken in Andorra, whereas the black and yellow stick thing was taken in Italy. I haven't done much research on this topic, so I would advise looking on GeoTips and other websites or videos that may cover it, and there's nothing stopping you from exploring on Street View either. Place signs and direction signs can be very useful for identifying a country, and here are 3 good examples of that. On the top left, we have a place sign with A to Z characters, but we also have Cyrillic on the top. It is very common to have this in Bulgaria, so if you are stuck between other countries in the Balkans or Central Europe, this is a very useful thing to know to confirm it's Bulgaria. At the bottom, we have a Greek sign, and although it's a unique language in itself, you may not be able to see it at a distance, but if you see the yellow text, this is unique to Greece. A good way to separate Czechia and Slovakia is the direction signs, and in Czechia, you have these thick white arrowheads that stick out of the sign, whereas Slovakia will not have these thick white arrowheads. Checking the back of signs can be very useful, especially for the Americas. For example, on the left we have the Columbian cross, and the reason why we call it the Columbian cross is because when you have a white cross on the back of the sign, it is only found in Colombia, especially if we are looking at the Americas. Meanwhile, Brazil mostly has black on the back of its signs, and it is by far more common in Brazil in comparison to other South and North American countries. Here are some more unique signs you can learn. On the left, we have a priority road sign, and when it is strong orange like this, you can only be in Belgium. I have made a video on priority road signs that you can check out in the description down below. In the middle, we have a Romanian yield sign. Romania is the only country in Europe to have this triangle sign with the very thick red outline, and it appears that it has a very small amount of white in the middle. Also in Scandinavia, it is much more common to come across yellow signs with red outlines. Although they can be found in other countries, if you are getting Scandinavian vibes, you can rule out Denmark and Norway on most instances, since they would not have those signs and will have white. Cookie does cover further differences between Scandinavian countries based off the signs and other methods, so feel free to check out his video in the description. Guardrails are also important to learn on GeoGuessr, and in this instance we're going to look at the colours of the guardrails and reflectors. In Europe, generally, when you have yellow guardrail reflectors, you should be in Spain. In similar countries like France, Italy and Portugal, you won't have these yellow reflectors. Therefore, it can be an easy way to identify Spain. This yellow guardrail at the top is a more specific example and may be quite of a niche, and you can get this in Yamaguchi in Japan, and this is very useful because Japan is a large and wide country which can be difficult to get high points in. And here is where you can find Yamaguchi in Japan. I also recommend checking out a guide that I've linked down below for learning the different guardrail types, as well as where you will get different reflector colours. Wall barriers can be also useful for identifying a country. On the top right we have this bottom tooth-like structure, and in Europe these are very common for the Canaries, Madeira and other islands in the Mediterranean, as well as in just general warm tropical areas with high altitudes. You can also get this in Asia, and Bhutan is notorious for having them, which is pictured down below. It is important to be aware that coverage does get added and replaced over time, so with the upcoming slides this will be accurate at the time of the release, but it could become less useful in the future. However, the general rule of thumb should still apply, and on the left we have the, I quote, normal antenna. And when you see this antenna, you can rule out the Americas in most instances, and Africa as well, excluding Tunisia and Generation 4 South Africa. It is found on most countries, but it is far more abundant in Europe. On the right, we have the, I quote, stubby antenna, and it will appear shorter and thicker in comparison to the normal antenna. And this is mostly found in the Americas, with the exception of Cambodia. Sometimes you can get it in New Zealand or Hawaii, but generally it means you're either in the Americas or Cambodia. There is a great way to separate the stubby antennas in Cambodia and the Americas, and if you look closely at both the images, you can see this coil or coils go around the antenna. On the left, we have the traditional one found in the Americas, which tend to only have one coil going round. In contrast, if you look to the right, it appears that we have 3 coils going round on the antenna on the right, and that one is unique to Cambodia. Be aware that sometimes coils and antennas can be blurred out, so it is only useful when you see most of the stubby antenna. You can also get long antennas in Europe and other continents, however they are much less common, and it is harder to work out which countries have them and which ones don't. But one thing that could be useful is when there is no antennas at all. And if you are in Europe, having no antenna at all could be a good way to identify Serbia and North Macedonia. But this could change if they get Generation 4 coverage. It is also important to check both sides of the car when doing this, as well as checking if there are other clues around you to see if it actually makes sense to be one of those 2 countries. This is because you can get most countries where it doesn't show antennas at some given point on the street view, especially when it is a Generation 2 or Generation 4 camera. You can also get colour variation, and like mentioned before, this may become less accurate as more street view footage gets added. Generally, when you get a blue car in the top left, it is a good hint you have Generation 4 coverage, and this can be found in many countries, but it can be also useful for ruling out countries that don't have Generation 4 yet. You can also get red cars, and the best example is the Ukraine car on the top right, and this is a good way to separate it with Russia because Russia would not have a red car. Sometimes you get this red car in Belgium as well, so this could be another way of separating it between a round where you're unsure if it is France or Belgium. The 2 other common car colours is black and white, and I'm more specifically talking about the strong white colours. So if it appears like a ghost car like the red car in the top right, I am excluding that in the next few slides. So when you have a strong black car in South America, you can only be in Peru, Argentina or Uruguay. And if we're looking at South America again and it is a white car, a strong white car, it can only be Peru, Chile or Bolivia. Learning telephone codes can become really handy when trying to narrow down which regions you are in within a large country. For example, in France, 01 telephone codes mean you're in Paris or around Paris. The remaining numbers follow a clockwise pattern starting from the northwest, so it is quite easy to get familiar with. Brazil is an absolute pain to learn, even for the more professional players, but learning the telephone codes can prove essential for getting better at the country. And you can look at it as much as you want. It is not the most clearest pattern in the world, but you can say the 60s are to the west, the 90s are the far north, the 80s and 70s are the northeast, and then you've got the 50s and 40s in the more southern parts, and then you've got the 10s, 20s, and 30s more towards like the east central part of Brazil. Japan, however, has a very easy pattern to follow, and generally the more south and west you go, the bigger the number gets. So for example, if you have a 09 to start off with on a telephone number, there is a good chance you are in the more southern and western part of Japan. Feel free to check out these diagrams in your own time, but as a beginner, I recommend being good at learning the first numbers before you move on to the second numbers. You can also find other telephone code maps on GeoTips to get you started as well. Door numbers can also be very useful for separating similar countries. On the left, we have a strong red and strong blue background with white text, and this can be found in Czechia, but it can't be found in Slovakia in most cases. Slovakia will mostly have a white background with the text and outline either being mostly blue or red. We also have the Slovenian house number on the right, which is similar to the Czechia one, but it is a different font and a slight different shade of red. It is also good to know about architecture and unique buildings in given countries. In Bhutan, you get these very striking houses pretty much everywhere, and this type of style of building is only found in Bhutan on official Street View. In Andorra and the outskirts of the Pyrenees, you generally get these unique stone buildings. When you are in a very mountainous area and you see these type of buildings, there is a very high chance that you should be in Andorra. When you get these striking red buildings made out of mostly wooden planks, with the window outlines being a very strong white, you are mostly going to get these buildings in Scandinavian countries, aka the Nordic houses. Being familiar with the different types of biomes and where they are distributed can be very helpful for avoiding big mistakes as a beginner. Here is a useful map that you can look at in your own time, but I have made my own video on different biomes that goes into more detail, and the link for that is down below. Unique vegetation is also very handy for identifying given countries and specific regions. Here is an example of these giant butterbur, or in other words, Hokkaido cabbage, which is only found in the most northern parts of Japan, like Hokkaido Island, but can also be found in some parts of the Far East Russia as well. These trees are piranhas, and when you know it is Brazil, when you see these trees, it can only be either in a state of piranha or its neighbouring states. Known as giant baobab, this is a very unique type of tree that you can find in Madagascar on Street View. You can also get very similar, smaller species of this in other countries in Africa, however, so don't be fully baited unless they are absolutely massive like these. If you want to learn more about unique vegetation and just differences in environmental meta, I recommend checking out the links down in the description. It was Zigzag and Alok actually who used this guide, and I'm pretty sure Alok made it. Feel free to correct me in the comments, which helped them and other people get better at identifying different parts of Russia. So I highly recommend checking that video out as well. Covering the differences in currencies can be useful for separating similar countries. However, be aware that countries can change their currencies over time, and their current currency could be different to the past footage. You can check out all the different currencies on GeoTips, and I have linked the specific page down below. Seeing the units of distance can also be useful for separating similar countries. For example, when you are split between Canada and the USA, Canada will use kilometers, whereas USA will use miles. As a bonus, you can also learn where specific petrol station companies are found, and this company, Eni, can only be found or is mostly found in Austria or Italy, whereas Petrol tends to be a lot more common or only found in Asia according to GeoTips, especially in the countries of Malaysia and Philippines. My advice is checking out the GeoTips link for petrol stations down below for more information. The last and final advice is just practicing games. So some rounds you will end up not having many clues, or in some cases no metas at all to use to even give you a chance of where you're at. So it is important really to improve your vibes by playing a lot of games. This is the most effective for remote rounds, so when your vibes improve, you're going to get better at the more remote locations, like on the maps of Real World, or just playing on NNPZ. But generally, the more you practice, the more likely you will gain familiarity of what a country or region would look like. And on that note, thanks for watching this video. Although most of these tips were more beginner based, it did take a while to make and put together. If you found some of these useful in any way, feel free to drop a like and let me know. And if you want to see the continental tips, which is coming up in the near future, feel free to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it when it comes out. If you haven't checked out my other videos, feel free to check out my tips playlist. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Yeah, of course, man.